Welcome to K-State Now with Kansas State University President Dr. Kirk Schultz. I'm Richard Baker. The fall semester is just about underway. What kind of student numbers are we looking at?
We expect to be about the same numbers that we were last year, which is just shy under 25,000 total head count. And that includes on-campus student, off-campus students, all three campuses, distance students, everything like that. So we expect generally to be pretty flat.
So not much of an increase at all.
No, and the way this works for folks out there is we have this bizarre piece of higher education which says that we don't actually do an official enrollment count until the 20th day. And so we actually wind up going about 3 weeks before we actually release any numbers. And that's because we'll still have students that haven't registered for classes or things that are showing up next week to enroll. And so we wait a week or two before we really know what those are. But we can look at housing deposits and some of these kinds of things, and it gives us a pretty fair idea, and we think we're going to be about where we were last year, but frankly until that 20th day you just never know.
Do we have enough living accommodations on campus for the new students?
Well, we don't have enough living accommodations for new students, period, and that's the reason we're building Weefald Hall. But there's so much housing around town that people can go into apartments and other kinds of things. So, you know, people stay in residence halls, fraternity, sorority, Greek life, and also we have scholarship houses and some other kinds of things. We have an honors house that has about 50 students. So there's lots of options, but we probably really should build a couple more residence halls so that we could require all of our freshmen to have an on-campus experience of some nature so that they've got RAs there. It would help retention, but we currently just simply don't have the capacity for it.
As I remember when I started Kansas State, freshmen had to live on campus and
Right.
were not allowed to have cars on campus.
And how many years ago was that, just for our watching audience?
I think it's about 7, maybe 8.
7, 8 years ago, right.
So what about tuition? They're going to pay extra.
Yep, tuition went up this year by 3.6% across all the region's institutions. So all 6 schools, University of Kansas, K-State, Wichita State, Emporia State, Pittsburgh State, and Fort Hays State all went up by 3.6% that was capped by the legislature. However, there are some fees that were also put in place. So for Kansas State, we put in a per credit hour fee, an additional fee for engineering and business and human ecology. The engineering and business fees in particular are to hire additional faculty. Those have been growing colleges. We need additional faculty, so those dollars are prescribed. They go into a pot. They can only be used for additional new faculty. The one in human ecology is going to be for advising and undergraduate research opportunities, laboratory equipment. I say lab equipment for the teaching mission, things like that. So those would be in addition to the 3.6% general tuition increase.
I know in certain circumstances you need to have student permission to increase certain things. Are these fees one of those circumstances?
Absolutely. Each of the 3 colleges, the student representatives from those areas, so we say the Business Students Association, I don't know the right name for it, but the Engineering Student Associations worked with the leadership of those colleges to put together those fee proposals. And there's a lot of negotiation that goes on back and forth. We won't entertain a fee proposal that does not come out of the colleges with student support. So if somebody comes to us and say, well, we need to do this, Kirk, it's got all this great stuff, and well, the first question we ask is, well, what do the students in that college think about it? And if they say, well, we haven't talked to them, we say, well, you know, it's dead. You've got to go back and you've got to do that. And a lot of times that delays it a full year. The other part of it is we are transparent with how those fees are spent with the students. So the students also see how those dollars are spent because, you know, they voted to move those forward as a proposal. We owe it back to them to also show that we're actually using the money the way that they think it should be used.
How does our tuition compare, say, with surrounding states?
We tend to be very cheaper, for example, than Colorado and Missouri. So for those two states, our tuition is quite a bit cheaper. We're on par with Oklahoma, and we're on par with Nebraska. So, Illinois, on the other hand, if you go a few more states away, it's more cost effective to come out of state from Illinois to K-State than it is to stay in state and go to University of Illinois. So we're still a pretty good cost-effective opportunity in this particular region, particularly on states in about an 8 or 9 state region around us.
So do you think we might be losing students to other states?
I don't necessarily think so. We've maintained about an 80% market share of Kansas high school graduates coming to K-State as part of our undergraduate population. And if I look historically over the last 4 or 5 years, that number's been pretty constant. So we don't think that we're losing a lot of students hopping across the border because all of us in higher ed do about the same thing. Our out-of-state tuition sometimes is 2 to 3 times in-state tuition. So it really, unless the exception of that would be the really academically high-profile students. The students get a 35, 36 on the ACT, graduating #1 in their high school class. Every college and university out there wants those students. And sometimes they'll get free rides at a variety of institutions, and then they pick based on fit and athletic teams and who has the nicest dorms and all kinds of other stuff.
I've seen a couple of articles that says this increase in tuition is the fault of the schools. How do you see that?
If I look historically, generally speaking, most states are de-investing in public higher education. We still have salaries to pay, we have buildings, we have utilities. We got the same costs at any health insurance, the same cost of any other business, and the demands from our students of today are significantly different than when you and I were in school. If we look at the quality of residence halls and we look at the tutoring available and lots of things, they're all good things. We should be doing them, but when we were in school, a lot of those things simply weren't available. They weren't provided by the university. So some of it is cost of increase just by nature, like anything else has. Could higher education continue to do more, to do things more effectively, efficiently on the administrative side, the way we do purchasing, these kinds of things? Absolutely. And we're working on those things. But this idea that all the cost escalation is all our fault, I think is simply not true. A lot of states just have decided, hey, we're just going to give you this amount of money and you do whatever you want to with tuition. And that's largely been what's happened in Kansas.
You and I have talked about this a couple of times before. What are the possibilities of Kansas State or other Regents universities becoming, I don't know what you'd call them, private public schools, public-private schools?
Essentially, K-State's already there in some regards. A lot of these buildings, when people go on campus and they see these buildings, have huge percentage of the dollars have come from private sources. And so I think you're seeing those kinds of things already happening. And but there are some countercurrents, and I want to point these out. The state of Washington, and I've never seen this in my higher education career, felt tuition at the Washington public universities was getting too high. There they control tuition. So what they did is they cut tuition at like University of Washington and Washington State by I think 15%. And then decided to backfill those dollars to the universities. So what happened is for the students now, they're going to get bills 15 to 20% lower than a year ago. But the state legislature said we're going to provide those same equivalency dollars back to the universities, so they're not expected to take a cut. That's a $220 million investment the state of Washington has elected to make in public higher education. That's notable, and I hope that's the kind of trend that other states take notice of.
We've also seen cuts in K-12 education. What kind of an impact does it have when the student then ends up going to college at Kansas State, University of Kansas, wherever?
Anytime we have students come in, there's a certain set of students that no matter what their background, where they went to school, they're going to be successful. But the vast majority of students that come in, we need them to have the best teachers they can in high school. We need them to have the best, toughest curriculum they can get in high school. And anytime we see cuts to K through 12, eventually that's going to affect higher education, because it means that we may have some students come that aren't quite as prepared as they were some number of years ago. So to me, I like to look at education as holistically, K through 12, higher education, technical education all together. And I think in the economy of the future, states that are investing aggressively in those areas are going to have that trained workforce that they need. States that de-invest are going to all of a sudden figure out, well, maybe we can't get some of those companies to locate here or build here or grow here the way we'd like to, because they can't get the workforce they need. So I think there's some short-term gains to be realized with some of these cuts, but I think if you look out a decade, states that have cut a lot of this are really going to wish that they had invested instead of cut.
It may be my imagination, but it seems like we have more international students than ever on campus.
Again, we won't know exactly what those numbers look like, but yes, we continue to see a lot of students from outside the United States that are interested in the undergraduate experience. A lot of times people equate international students with graduate school, but we have around 900 or more undergraduates that come to us from around the world and represent 30 or 40 countries. So it's not just all students from China or different places. We've worked to diversify that student body so that we get them from lots of different areas around the world. It's valuable for them, it's valuable for us, and it's a great experience for students in classes to have somebody maybe in a group from Saudi Arabia and China, the US and Latin America, all working on a project together. That's what's going to help train our students to work in a global environment.
Does Kansas State work actively to recruit international students?
Absolutely. We have recruiting offices in China, in India. We had one in Vietnam for a year or two. So we want to have those offices close by where the students are, so that we can work to make sure we answer their questions, and K-State's kind of out there in front. And K-State was an early leader in having some of these offices out there. Now, are we ever going to have 15 offices all over the country? Probably not. All over the world, excuse me. Probably not. But we have key areas where we've had students that are faculty and staff say, hey, the students from those areas have been academically successful and work well at K-State. Those are areas we want to continue to recruit from.
As we said earlier, classes start real quickly. There's all kinds of construction going on campus. Are we ready to somehow shepherd these students, new and old, around the fences, around the heavy equipment?
We're going to do the best that we can, and we're going to have our campus security out and lots of people with signs to really kind of help, especially new folks to K-State. We had about 2,000 students move in this weekend for sorority recruitment and international students and all these other things. And I got a note today from a father out in western Kansas that was dropping his daughter off this weekend, and he said, despite all the construction, it was smooth, it was polished, there was people there to help, they found their way in and on and off campus. So, we're going to have more people out than we normally would, but we're going to make it work, and it's going to be an adventure. And somebody sent me on social media a campus map that was supposed to show where construction was, and they'd written across it, construction everywhere. So that's the way, that's progress.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been K-State Now with the president of Kansas State University, Dr. Kirk Schultz. I'm Richard Baker.